Coming to you live around the world from NOV's Studio 202. This is Inside Out Horizons. With your hosts, Lydia Brantley, Mai Belmar, Jeremy Griswold, Cass Casey, Michael Gaines, and Shelby Dumaine. Now, let's start the show.
Welcome to Inside Out, where we bring on guests to talk about the evolving energy landscape and new technologies in the energy industry. My name is Jeremy Griswold. Today we have Terry Virts, Colonel Terry Virts on the show, who I'll intro here in a minute. But before we get there, let's take it over to Shelby Dumaine. She's going to tell you how you can connect with us and on social media.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you, everyone, for joining today, this morning. We're here in Navasota, like Jeremy said, but I'm curious where you are in the world. So if you're watching right now and want to get involved in the show, go ahead and comment down below whether you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. Let us know where you're watching from. I always like to see that. And then throughout the show, if you have any questions for Jeremy or for Colonel Terry Virts, like Jeremy mentioned is our guest today, go ahead and let us know below, and we'll have a live Q&A at the end. So we'll get to as many questions as we can in the time, but feel free to go ahead and type those in. And if you think of any questions later that you didn't get a chance to ask while we were live, you can email those to socialmedia@nov.com. You can also catch any past episodes of the show at nov.com/live. So lots of ways you can get involved in the show, but the most important one to keep in mind is while you're watching live today, just go ahead and comment any questions you have below. Again, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, we got it all. I got all the screens up, so we'll be looking in the comment section and looking forward to your questions. All right. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Shelby. So as we mentioned, our guest today is Colonel Terry Virts. He served as a U.S. Air Force test fighter pilot. He's a NASA veteran of 2 space flights and a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy, Embry-Riddle, and Harvard Business School. His time in space included commanding the International Space Station, 3 spacewalks, and piloting the space shuttle. Terry's an author, filmmaker, speaker, and photographer, and he brings a great perspective on a wide range of topics, including environmental, global, wealth, intercultural leadership, crisis and risk management. But today we're curious to get Terry's perspective on energy. So welcome to the show. Thanks.
Well, yeah, thanks for having me on. I've got a little bit of a scratchy voice after the World Series last night. I was down there for the very sad Game 6, so sound like Barry White, but that's okay.
It's okay. We'll get through it.
Trying to recover.
Yeah, and sad that we don't have another game today.
Yes.
But yeah, so thanks for being on. We want to just get get your perspectives as someone who's, you were well traveled before you went into space. But we were just curious, how did your perspective change after that experience? You spent over 200 days in space.
Yeah, so one of the interesting things, I was in the Air Force. In high school, I did an exchange in Finland. In college, I'd spent a semester in France, and I was based all over the world. So like you said, I'd done a little bit of traveling. And then whenever I would come home, I remember, if I was landing in America, I'd think like, all right, I'm back home again. Or if I'd land in Germany, I'd think, all right, I'm in Germany again, or I'm in Korea or whatever. And I don't ever feel that anymore. I always, like if I land in a different country, I was just in Saudi Arabia this week, going back to Europe in a week. I just kind of feel like I'm always home, which it took me a while to realize that, but maybe if a few trips after my time to space, I remember thinking, wow, I always feel like I'm home, like I'm just home on Earth, which was pretty interesting.
Yeah, that's fascinating. From a political standpoint, you worked with an international crew while on the space station. How has it changed your view on, global politics?
Those are important. So of all the things on Earth, the climate is obviously important. helping to bring people out of poverty, which has happened a lot in the last century, which has been a good thing, is important. But politics is important. I never thought I would have that perspective from space, but I remember I realized that when you look at Earth during the daytime, you can't tell there's people there. But when you look at Earth at nighttime, that's when you see city lights. That's when you can tell there's people there. And after watching that for a little while, it was my 5th night in space when I realized that. And it hit me that what you're looking at is not population, you're looking at wealth when you see these cities, and you're looking at politics. And I have a photo that I share that's like the most profound example of politics on Earth, which is North Korea. South Korea is this beautiful, bright, vibrant city. Even you can see China in the distance. China's very active, and North Korea is just this big black hole. So to be able to see that from space kind of hit home that, wow, if we get our politics right, life for people can be good. If we get our politics wrong, life for people can be bad, which was a perspective I never expected after going to space.
Yeah, I mean then that brings us right into the energy industry. I mean, it's one of these topics that you see the lights in a city, and the infrastructure just isn't there in some of these poorer countries. What we want to hear a little bit more about is what does the energy mix in space look like?
Right.
How do you manage all the difficulties of being in space, needing an energy source, but also there's issues with conservation, issues with the own CO2 that you're breathing out into the space shuttle.
Yeah. Let me talk about that. But real first, I do guest lecturing at Harvard Business School, and one of the students there is an African lady, and we were talking during the pandemic, and I said, well, why don't you guys just manufacture your own PPE? Why do you have to buy it from China? And she said, Terry, we don't have electricity. So what a fundamental thing. Yeah. And when you have electricity, you can have jobs, and you can have air conditioning, which means you don't have mosquitoes, which means 500,000 African children don't die from malaria. So energy is really important. Like, people need to, obviously we know that, but it's very important to get that out there. But the way we deal with energy in space is a lot of the same challenges we face on Earth. We use solar panels, obviously, for electricity, and batteries, because the space station, it's not half and half, because the orbit is a few hundred miles up, about 400 kilometers up. It's more like 2/3 in sunlight, 1/3 in darkness. But you still need batteries for when you're in darkness. And so that's a similar challenge to if you're going to go with wind and solar. The wind doesn't always blow, so you have to have some backup, whether it be natural gas with carbon capture or batteries or whatever. So we have to deal with that. Carbon removal from the atmosphere is really important. And in fact, we had an amine system on the space station. We also had an adsorbent system on the station that I spent lots and lots of time fixing because it kept on breaking. But the CO2 concentration in space is really, really high, much higher. It's like tens of times higher than it is down here on Earth, which leads to, it gives astronauts headaches. It makes you kind of cranky. CO2 is not a good thing. You don't want that. So removing CO2 from our atmosphere is very important. Recycling, we had to recycle water. There's an interesting system that takes water and makes oxygen and hydrogen, and you can combine the hydrogen. Well, first of all, that's rocket fuel. So if you needed to make that for rocket fuel, oxygen and hydrogen was what powered the space shuttle, and other rockets use that. Or you can take the oxygen and breathe it, and you can take the hydrogen and combine it with CO2 in a Sabatier reaction and make water, which you can drink or use for food or turn into hydrogen and oxygen. So it's this whole recycling system where we recycle water, we recycle the CO2, and that it's not 100% self-contained, but it's 90% or whatever. And when it costs tens of thousands of dollars per kilogram, this would be literally this would be tens of thousands of dollars to launch into space. That's an important economic incentive to have that recycling system. So a lot of the same issues we have in space, we have here on Earth.
Just a much smaller scale, but more expensive at the same time.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
It is one of those topics where today it seems like a lot of development or push into outer space is being led by, billionaire initiatives. And it's a controversial topic for people who think, we should be focusing on issues here on Earth. But I'd be curious what your take is on that, because a lot of the technology that, is piloted in space, or a lot of developed for the space program, does make its way back into everyday lives for people here on Earth.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, those topics I was just talking about, water purification. NASA has some water purification systems that have been sent to Haiti and Western Africa, and people need clean water, and they don't always have clean water. So there's a lot of spin-offs you can take from space to down here on Earth. But that's in the same way, the billionaires that are launching into space, there's a lot of angst and a lot of, anti-billionaire sentiment, which I can understand, and inequality is a problem, and we need to address that. But at the end of the day, those billions of dollars are not spent in space. When I went in on my first mission on Endeavour and we opened up the payload bay doors, we didn't launch $1 billion bills out into outer space. All that money was spent on Earth, on engineers with good middle class, technical, scientific, engineering, management, support jobs. So what we do in space can provide a lot of benefits down here on Earth. And the other thing I want to say too, companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin and others, there's lots, are innovative. And a lot of times the job of government is not to be innovative. The job of government is to be big and get more money and have more people. And, we used to joke that we put the no in innovation. And so, but governments are good at raising taxes and money and having, infrastructure, and companies are good at being innovative. So if you can figure out how to do the public-private partnership right, that's a good way to explore space. And I think we're going to talk about it, but that can probably work in the energy industry also.
Yeah. So with those constraints that you're living with, in space, how did it impact your relationship with energy in your everyday life today? Is there anything that you find is lingering on how you treat, a bottle of water versus?
Yeah. This is an interesting parallel. One of the things that we did at NASA was train with this organization called National Outdoor Leadership School, NOLS, and they sent us to. I went to Alaska twice. I wrote a chapter about it in my book. On these like survival expeditions, but it was really, the goal was to put you with your crew and make you as miserable as possible, so that when you're in space and you're tired of being there and whatever, you're in difficult situations, how to handle it emotionally and how to deal with each other during tough situations. But one of the themes of NOLS and a lot of outdoor camping and that kind of thing is leave no trace, trying to live on a minimum amount of stuff, and in America we have way too much stuff. My house is full of junk. I don't need the stuff I buy, and it's really possible to live with less. And when you're in space, there's no Amazon hey, I need this. It'll be here tomorrow. You can't do that. So I think learning how to live with less, A, saves you money because you're not spending money all the time on stuff. And B, it saves you time because you're not cluttering your house. You don't have to clean it. You don't have to fix it. And, stuff just takes time. And it's good environmentally. I mean, the less stuff, the less trash, the less energy we have to waste. So that concept of leaving no trace and living with less stuff is a good thing in general.
Yeah, that's. I'm familiar with the National Outdoor Leadership School.
Yeah.
It is a really great program.
Oh yeah, it's a very cool project, and I'm sure you could probably do trips for fun rather than just trying to make you miserable like they did at NASA. Yeah. But being in the Alaskan wilderness was unbelievable. No phone, no internet for 2 weeks. It was great. It was amazing.
That's good. Well, real quick, just for those who may have joined us since we started the show. Today we have Colonel Terry Virts, a retired astronaut, on the show, and just wanted to bring Shelby back on real quick, and she can remind the audience on how they can interact with the show today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, just as a reminder, if you have any questions, we will be starting that live Q&A here in just a little bit. So go ahead and let us know in the comments, whether you're on Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube, what questions you have for Colonel Virts. All right, back to you, Jeremy.
All right, thanks. So, Terry, COP26 is taking place this week and next week, and a lot of people in our industry are keeping an eye on that conference and some of the global delegations that are talking about energy policy, renewable energy policy, and carbon reduction. You know, with the perspective that you have, what would you share with some of the leaders at the conference, or what would you like them to hear?
I'd love to go there. In fact, I was there yesterday virtually. I had to record a message for a film, an IMAX film I'd made. They showed there at their film festival. But I think it's easy to take an ideological stance or to get angry about this or to jump on a bandwagon. And I think you need to step back and try and make it as unemotional and dispassionate as you can. And you need to look at, okay, here we are, there's 7 billion of us on the planet, and bringing people out of extreme poverty is important. And, you know, having people live a quality of life is important. So you can't just go one extreme that hurts people. And it's easy for us in the West and in the wealthy nations to look down, you know, to say, well, everybody should drive a Tesla. Well, that works in Norway. It works really well in Norway. Most people do drive Teslas there, but that's not going to work for billions of the world's people. So we need to have policies that recognize the need to, you know, help the lower income nations, but also minimize climate change, because that's going to just lead to more misery in the future. And I think when it comes to energy policy, you know, electric cars are an important part, but it really is all of the above. You know, carbon capture is an important part of that, because fossil fuels, we have centuries of gas thanks to the shale revolution. So if we can use that in a carbon neutral way, why not use it? Solar and wind are important. I think nuclear should be very important. And because of ideology, we've kind of forgotten nuclear power. Literally, almost nobody has ever died from nuclear power. It's a very extremely safe. You know, thousands of people a year die from coal mining accidents in China, but nuclear has been completely safe. But because of irrational fears, we don't go down the nuclear way. There's other technologies. Geothermal is a big one that could provide huge amounts of power that you just don't hear about. So I think those leaders need to step back and take a rational approach to things and not just the kind of jump on the bandwagon approach. Carbon is important, but methane is 30 times more important, right? So we need to keep that in mind. So hopefully we can do that. Hopefully we can make commitments that actually make change, because whenever you get a big international body together, it's very difficult, and each nation has its own constituencies, and it's easy for the leaders to say something in Glasgow, but then when they have to go back and tell their people, that's a different thing. So that is a tough challenge, but I think it's, you know, it's the moonshot that we need to be doing, because everybody lives here on Earth, and that's where, you know, one of the perspectives I got from space was that, and we know this intellectually, but to actually like look down on the planet and not be on it, it's a beautiful planet. It really is. And everything else in the universe is like blackness. Humans can't live anywhere without a spacesuit or a spaceship. You know, you can go to Mars, but we're never going to be able to walk around on Mars. It's always going to be spaceship or spacesuit. There may be other planets, but they're so far away. Those star systems are light years or hundreds of light years away that we're never going to get there. So all we have is Earth, and we need to, you know, look at it as such.
Well, that's a great perspective. And it's interesting you mentioned nuclear. On the last show that I hosted, we had someone from the Nuclear Energy Institute.
Oh, good.
Talking to us about some of the latest developments. So that would be if you're interested in that, go back and check out our show with Dr. Everett Redman from the the Nuclear Energy Institute. It was a fascinating interview there too. But it just happens in the U.S. to be one of these areas where we have bipartisan support for.
to having break-even fusion. And if we can get to that point, you know, we have limitless energy forever. And so that's a technology. It's off in the distance. You know, there's still a lot that needs to go there, but it's high risk, but it's also high return. It's the highest possible return, and that's something that no one is really talking about, which is interesting. Given all the trillions of dollars that people want to spend on energy, that seems like an area that would be worth focusing on.
Okay, well, we do want to leave some time for questions from the audience.
Okay.
Before we go there, we had a friend of the show who has been on Inside Out before named Laura Stadler, and she was interested in what kind of pranks astronauts play on each other in outer space.
Well, that was some of the best time. When I was on Expedition 43, we had a great crew, and one of the things we would try to get our crewmates to call down to the ground. So one time I was there with Scott Kelly, and our crewmate Samantha Cristoforetti was by herself in the Japanese module. So we called her on the intercom, pretending like we were mission control in Japan, like trying to get her to call them. But it was on the intercom. It wasn't on the radio going down to Scuba, is where their mission control center is. Anyway, but she's a lot smarter than we are, and she figured out, hey, this is the intercom. This isn't the air-to-ground radio. So it didn't work on her, but probably, you know, it would probably have worked on me. But that was one of the funnier moments.
That sounds like fun. So Shelby, do you want to bring us a few audience questions?
Yeah, absolutely. This first one comes from Jake on LinkedIn, and he was wondering, would you ever consider going back into space, maybe with SpaceX or any of the other private companies that are journeying to space?
Well, hello, Jake on LinkedIn. I have thought about that. When I left NASA, it's kind of a one-way door, but there are lots of other private options out there. So I kind of always said if I could go make a movie in space, I got to help make A Beautiful Planet, which is probably the most important thing I did in space, just because so many millions of people get to see an IMAX movie like that. So if I could make a movie, I think that would be interesting. But never say never. I'm not planning on it. There's lots of work to do down here on the planet, but you never know. Never say never.
So a follow-up question is, what kind of hopes would you have for like you have children or your grandchildren and their relationship with traveling into space?
The good news is with these space tourist companies that's going to get to be more popular. It's funny, people say, well, now finally regular people can go into space. It's like, yeah, regular people like the richest man on the planet and William Shatner and, 18 sons of private equity fund managers. Now finally normal, unlike me, who is like the first guy to go to college in my family, and which kind of makes me laugh. But the prices will come down to, a few $100,000, which is an awful lot of money. I don't have that laying around, but you could save up a couple $100,000 if you live in an advanced nation. And so I think having lots of people go into space will be a good thing. Just the more people that see the planet, the better. And it's a dangerous thing though. Like riding a rocket is not like riding a 777 on a flight to London. There's several orders of magnitude more risk that you take, and so people need to be. I wrote a chapter in How to Astronaut about that. People need to be sober about their expectations. If you're riding a rocket, you're riding a rocket. You're not flying on a United Airlines flight.
Shelby, how about?
I never thought about it.
Yeah.
We got another one on LinkedIn again. Do you foresee nuclear fusion energy or offshore wind energy as kind of the best viable option moving forward, or is there one best, or how do you?
Well, nuclear fusion, if it worked, if we get past the break-even point, solves electric power forever on Earth. Wind is good unless you're a bird flying near the turbine, which is is a problem. There's also the aesthetic look of wind turbines. Where do you buy the wind turbines from is a issue. And in the same way that in the 70s and 80s, in the 20th century, it was the biggest wealth transfer in history from the West to the Middle East. And how many wars have we fought there, over the years? It's caused a lot of problems. And right now, wind, solar panels, batteries, hundreds of billions, if not trillions, over the coming decade are going to China for that. And that's a that's an issue that we need to think about. So when it comes to things like offshore wind, which is great, and I think a source of a lot of electricity in decades to come, you can look at it from the energy requirement point of view, you can look at it from the climate point of view, but you also need to look at it from a geopolitical point of view. And where we source solar panels from, and where we source batteries from, and where we source wind equipment from, we need to be mindful of how many billions and trillions of dollars are going in which direction and who does that benefit. That's a really important part of the equation that at COP26 does not get discussed very much.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. And
Yeah.
at the end of the day, too, to the original question, it's probably going to fall somewhere as a mix of all these technologies, and we'll see different regions maybe lean towards one or another, but we're probably going to need all the help we can get. But yeah, interesting perspective. Follow the money and where that's going from a geopolitical standpoint.
Well, it's gotten us into a lot of trouble, in where the oil and gas, originated from, that where that money flowed. So we should not make the same mistake twice. Hopefully we can be smart enough to do that.
Okay.
Definitely. And this one comes online from Michael. He was wondering what technology from the space industry could the energy or the oil and gas industry learn from or use?
Well, the oil and gas industry, the being able to manufacture lightweight, high reliability equipment for space is something that could be in certain components in oil and gas. I think a lot of oil and gas, you want lower cost, mass production. If something weighs a huge amount of weight, that's not really that big a deal. In space, that's everything. Weight is everything. So in areas in oil and gas where weight is important or ultra high reliability is important, I think those technologies can flow over. I think the ability to live on a space station is probably in some ways similar to living on a rig or on a drilling ship or something like that. And I know the carbon capture is something that we have to do on the space station, and it's going to be an important part of the oil and gas industry going forward. So there's probably multiple different ways, multiple different technology areas.
Were there any technologies in particular that were used to, provide redundancies or safety measures that you can recall?
Well, redundancy is kind of baked into NASA's philosophy. The space shuttle had a fail-ops, fail-safe philosophy, which is interesting because Arthur Clarke, one of my favorite science fiction authors from the 1940s, 1950s, one of my favorite books of all time is Rendezvous with Rama, and it was this civilization, and he always said the Ramans did everything in three, and NASA does everything in three also. So you have, if one thing breaks, you're still operational, fail ops, and if two things break, there's still one running, so you're still safe, fail safe. So the shuttle had either 3 or 4 computers and fuel cells and engines, and everything was always done in threes. And so that redundancy philosophy is probably a good transfer thing. For oil and gas equipment, sometimes you don't need any redundancy. It's just not that big a deal. But if there's a piece that's going to shut down the operation and cause a huge amount of expense or danger, most importantly, then that redundancy philosophy probably would carry over.
Okay. Do we have time for another question from the audience?
This one, again, is maybe a little more on the lighter side. Kristen online wanted to know, does being in space affect eyesight at all? Is that something that there's an impact on?
Well, no, that's a great question. That was actually probably the biggest research focus on my mission was on eyesight, because some astronauts had problems. Most of the time it would resolve itself once they got back to Earth, but we were trying to figure out what was causing that. And right now, all the fluid is down on our legs and our feet. Gravity pulls it down there, but in space that floats up, so astronauts kind of have puffy faces, and that adds to a lot of pressure. They call it intraocular pressure, smashing your eyeball and the optic nerve, and it changes your lens shape. So it's harder to see things close by, so you have to do this, but your far distant vision gets better, just the way your lens tends to bend. So the eyesight issue was a big, focus for several years at NASA. Luckily, it doesn't affect that many guys, and their eyesight recovers. But I did countless ultrasounds on my heart, on my eyeball, and on my brain, and they were trying to measure like how the blood vessels changed and what was going on inside of our body because of eyesight. So that's actually a really good question.
To follow up on that, I mean, you were in space for months at one point in time. What was the recovery like when you got back to Earth? I mean, I'm sure that process was pretty extensive too.
Yeah, coming back to Earth is interesting. So after both my flights, I felt very heavy. I remember I was the last guy to get out of the shuttle, and they came in to get me. Terry, it's your turn. So I had my helmet, and I was like, be careful, this thing weighs 500 pounds. And I remember getting into bed and pulled the blanket up, and it felt like I had a lead, like you're getting an x-ray, a lead blanket, you know, like there was some evil Marvel bad guy with a magnet ray that had me pinned to the bed, and I couldn't move from this thing. Dizziness is the other thing. I was really, really I mean, it was like, it wasn't a glass of wine. It was like a bottle or a couple bottles of wine, like, ugh. And I could walk, I could stand up, I could move around, but I didn't want to. And I wanted somebody next to me, and I never fell. And they made you do this like push-up where you're on the ground, and then you have to stand up as fast as you can to check orthostatic intolerance, which is when you get lightheaded. And I was okay. It was just all those things really stunk. So the first day was terrible. The second day was bad, but not as bad. The third day, the third day was like a glass of wine. It wasn't too bad. And after a week, I did a balance test where you have to stand in this room and they block your vision, and then they move the room. And so you have to get your balance back. And there's force sensors that measure how your feet do this. And like the quicker they stabilize, the better your balance. And my balance score a week after landing from a 200-day flight was better than it was before I launched. So that shocked me. I couldn't believe that.
Any theories on why?
It was just my body. I recovered really quickly. It was. I didn't expect that. I kind of didn't trust the result. Everybody was like, "Holy cow, they've never seen that." Some guys take months before they get back to normal. But for some reason, my body was just made to fly in space and come back to Earth, I guess.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's awesome. We'll do one more question just because it's kind of a follow-up to the previous one. So
Okay.
I'll allow it for
Okay.
time. This comes from Ari on LinkedIn. And he was wondering about, was there anything to do with flashes of light when you closed your eyes? Like you said, cosmic rays. What was the experience with that?
Yes. So that's a chapter in my book. I actually did a special with BBC a couple years ago called Anomaly. And it was about the South Atlantic Anomaly, which is this geological feature on the Earth where our magnetic field goes around the whole planet, but over the South Atlantic it dips. And that magnetic field is basically this big force field that protects the planet from radiation, from the sun or from other galaxies. They call it galactic cosmic radiation. That's why we have life. Without that radiation force field, we wouldn't have life because the radiation would kill us. And I remember it was my 5th night in space. I was going to sleep on the space shuttle. I closed my eyes, and all of a sudden, boom, this giant white flash. And I woke up, and I thought, cool, that's what the Apollo guys were talking about. And then until I thought about what was going on. So what was going on was these very heavy particles from going 0.9 the speed of light, whatever, from other galaxies or stars. It just goes right through the shuttle, and it would hit my optic nerve with so much energy that it sent this electrical signal that looked like a flash, which is pretty cool. And there's no sound, which is really weird to see a flash without sound. But until you realize, well, if that one's hitting, there's probably thousands of other ones hitting all the rest of my body. And of course, it can hit DNA and damage the DNA, and that can cause cancer. So that's the concerns. But not all astronauts see that, but I definitely did. And after a while, I was like, I wonder if there's any correlation. So I started to look at and you only see it at night because you have to have your eyes closed. But so when I'm going to bed, it would happen, and I'd open up the laptop and look at the map on where we are over the planet. And every time I looked, we were over the South Atlantic. And so that dip in the magnetic field, actually, I could see it with my eyes, which is kind of crazy.
That is. Well, we would love to keep you here all day and just ask you questions about space, but I think we'd be remiss if we didn't share with the audience your book, which is How to Astronaut,
All right.
An Insider's Guide to Leaving Planet Earth. Pick up a copy. You can hear many stories like that. But there's other ways to connect with Terry as well, terryvirts.com, and the podcast, which was called...
Down to
remind me?
Earth with Terry Virts. Yeah.
With Terry Virts.
I have a very eclectic group. I've had some of the UFO guys have been on.
Okay.
I had guide dogs from the blind. I had the best-selling author of the Afghanistan papers talking about Afghanistan. Filmmakers, a really cool Uyghur from China, refugee, escaped from China and started a business and has this amazing coding business. So anyway, very diverse group of folks. I'll need to have some folks from NOV to talk energy, and that would be actually really awesome.
That would be great. We know a few folks.
You do.
But yeah, thank you again for being on the show today. This was really great. I'm sure the audience enjoyed that. For those who are watching today, there's many ways to connect with NOV. You can go to nov.com/live. You can find links to all our social media channels there, past episodes of the show as well. So thank you for joining us today, and we hope to see you next time on Inside Out Horizons.